2 weeks of AP World History. So give yourselves a little hand, a pat on the back. And now the moment's over and we're moving on. So we're actually diving right into Unit 2 now. And today we're going to be talking about the Persian Empire, also called the Iranian Empire. The Persian Empire, the heartland of it anyway, is where modern day Iran is. So take a look at the timeline and the major events we'll be discussing, as well as our second podcast when we move on into ancient Greece. So our key concepts, as always. Take a quick look. PowerPoints on the Google Classroom if you need it. And let's dive into ancient Iran from 1000 to 500 BCE. Now, right in the front, you'll see the Persian homeland, and then the growth of the Persian Empire by 500 BCE. Now, guys, this is incredibly impressive. Just look at the sheer size, how far out the borders go. Their influence fell all the way down into Egypt. And I also want you to take a very close look at where the boundary stops, because that's going to be pretty important later. So a couple of things you should know before we get started. Iran's location, they're surrounded by mountains and deserts and the Persian Gulf, which leaves it open to attacks from nomads. But given their location, given what they were surrounded by, they had very limited natural resources. Fresh water is a problem, and because of the heat and the lack of water available, irrigation networks were actually dug underground to tap into underground water supplies. However, Iran does have plenty of mineral resources. They've got copper, tin, iron, gold, and silver, and plenty of timber. So, the Median Kingdom in northwestern Iran helped destroy the Assyrian Empire in the late 7th century BCE. And you probably remember talking about the downfall of the Assyrian Empire. And Iran was actually, they were a tribal area. They didn't have a lot of contact with outsiders until the Median Kingdom helped to destroy the Assyrian Empire. But what's interesting is there's an alliance that's held between the Achaemenid dynasty and the Persians, and Cyrus actually overthrew the Median king, and he is the first emperor in Persia. And his army was originally made up of Persians who were required to serve and provide their own equipment. But as the empire grew, it just became a standing army that he was able to pay for. And Cyrus continued to conquer all of the surrounding lands, and he was able to expand the control of Persia. And the Persian Empire is built up by a series of 3 kings. There's Cyrus, and then Cambyses. And Cambyses is actually Cyrus's son. And Cyrus dies in 530 BCE. He is attacking a people in Central Asia. It's unsuccessful, and he dies. But Cambyses takes the throne and continues his father's conquests. He defeats Egypt. He sends expeditions into Nubia and Libya. But this is where it gets really interesting. Cambyses dies, and there's a small coup, if you will. And a man by the name of Darius ends up marrying Cambyses' daughter and actually kills 6 pretenders for the throne of the Persian Empire. And I say pretenders because they probably had a better claim to the throne than he did. He's not actually a blood relative. He just happened to marry one, and that is his claim to the throne. And Darius is actually quite a brilliant leader. As he continues expanding the empire, he ends up building roads. He expands all the way to the Indus Valley, and he's going to be involved in a very famous battle, but he's also known for having a son who failed at a battle and helped to bring about the downfall of the Persian Empire. And if you've seen the movie 300, you'll know him as the villain Xerxes, but we'll get to that soon. Under Darius, the empire expanded so quickly that there was really no way it could be controlled just by one person. So the empire ends up being divided into 20 provinces, and each province is administered by a satrap, otherwise called a governor. And this is a man who's usually either related or somehow connected to the royal court. And these positions end up becoming hereditary. It's technically not supposed to be, but they do. And the further the province from the center of the empire, the more power the satrap has. Because here's the thing, it could take a person almost a year to get back to the center of the empire. So if you have a problem, if you have an issue, you talk to the satrap. And under Darius, reforms of the legal system involved appointing judges for life. He reformed the Persian administration system, the tax system. Under taxes, he would impose regular taxes. And he also created a ritual center called Persepolis, which was west of Susa. And this was where people would come together. It was a central administration, but also ceremonies were performed here as well. And what we know about Persian women is that elite women did enjoy some kind of influence, but for the most part, they really didn't have any power. And Persian kings developed a certain style, if you will, a certain flair, and they were the king of kings, and that was their title. And most people never actually saw the king. They were aloof, they were magical, and they were in charge of everything and everyone. And this is a great example of different people of the 20 provinces bringing gifts to Darius. Few things that we do know about the Persian Empire in particular are religion. The major religion of the Persian Empire was Zoroastrianism. And the origins are unclear, but what we do know is that there is the existence of a dualistic universe where there's a god who is good, God in heaven, versus a god of evil who is in the underworld. And this is really the first example of religion where there is not just one good god, but then also an evil one. So in Judaism, there was Yahweh, and in Zoroastrianism, you not only have God of the heavens, but God of hell, God of the underworld, and this has a really strong influence on Christianity. And Darius combined the moral philosophy of Zoroastrianism with political ideology, and this helped him solidify his claim that expanding an empire was his divinely driven mission. It was his quest from God. All right. We're going to move into the Aegean world, and we're not getting into ancient Greece just yet. What we're talking about first are Minoan, Crete, and Mycenaean Greece. And the rise of the Greeks, guys, take a look at this this map. You can see the Persian Empire in purple, and its boundaries coming very, very close to Greece. Remember, though, they never conquered the area that we're going to be talking about, Athens and Sparta. But we'll get there in just a moment. So Minoan Crete is known through legendary accounts of King Minos, the labyrinth, and the slaying of the Minotaur. But here's what we do know. Evidence suggests that this Minoan civilization was influenced by Egypt, by Syria, and by Mesopotamia. And there was examples of trade between these civilizations due to archaeological evidence that has been found, the remainders of pots, certain minerals. And unfortunately, we don't know a lot about Minoan Crete. We do know they were destroyed by the Mycenaean Greeks around 1450 BCE, but unfortunately, the writing system of Minoan Crete, which is called Linear A, has not been deciphered. And there is a theory, and I will get to that in just a minute. Let's talk about Mycenaean Greece first. The Mycenaean Greeks were descended from indigenous populations and Indo-European invaders, and thus developed a unique civilization around 1600 BCE. And evidence indicates that the Mycenaean civilization was probably influenced by the Minoans, and trade between the two allowed the Mycenaeans to really rise up, to gain power, but this would then lead to piracy as well, because why not? Within the Mycenaean civilization, archaeologists have found tombs that are filled with gorgeous, beautiful pieces of artwork, pieces of treasure. The Mycenaeans were the earliest Greek civilizations. Um, Within that region, though, it was the Minoans. And Linear B is the writing style of the Mycenaeans, as opposed to Linear A, which is the style of the Minoans. And there is a theory that historians have, and again, it's just a theory, may or may not be true. The Rosetta Stone is missing a chunk, a rather large piece on the top, and there's a theory that Linear A is written on that missing piece. And if that is true, that piece has probably been destroyed, and historians will never actually learn what Linear A translates into. But we do know what Linear B is. And that's the earliest form of writing that the Greeks used. And historians have been able to translate that, which gives us a bit more insight into the Mycenaean civilization. So, more that we know about them is the Mycenaeans controlled the economy. They organized grain agriculture and wool production. And again, there's evidence of long distance trade and contact between Egypt, again, by paintings on the walls, by different examples of pottery and other goods that originate in the Aegean world that appear in the Middle East, or vice versa. So what we do know is that the Minoan Cretan traders came first, and then they were replaced by the Mycenaeans. And in this trade, Crete and Greece exported wine and olive oil, weapons, craft goods, and slaves, as well as mercenaries. But they imported amber, ivory, grain, and metals. And there's a very fine line between trade and piracy. And an example of that, if you like your ancient history and you're really into mythology, because the story of the Greek gods in this is the siege of Troy between the Mycenaeans and the Hittites. And we do know that there was a city that was attacked that was nearly destroyed. And this is probably where the legend of Troy comes from. And here's a great example of an ancient city in Mycenaean Greece, and you can see the strong walls that keep the city safe. Um, you have the people who are living inside, you have artisans, you've got soldiers. You have, actually, what's pretty awesome here is a gravesite, the actual houses, and then the palace where the king would live. And here are some examples of pottery. We've got the gold working, and then we also have the boats that these Greeks would have used. And look at these incredibly long oars. And when we get into Athens, we're going to talk about the Athenian navy, and this is where they got this idea from, using these oars, only they would actually stack their men in rows of three. All right, so we're going to wrap up with the fall of the late Bronze Age civilization. This kind of concludes our entire look at Unit 1. We've been talking about the Hittites, about Egypt, the Assyrian Empire and the Babylonian Empire, and all of these empires begin falling about the same time period. The Egyptians are battling invasions from the sea. They'll lose control of Nubia in the south. Mycenaean civilization falls because of internal decline and external invasions. And the problem that's happening here is all of these empires are intertwined with each other. And as the empires are falling, the trading routes are obviously collapsing as well. And it just really shows how interdependent these civilizations were in the late Bronze Age. Their prosperity depended on trade links that linked them to each other and gave them access to natural resources, especially metal. You can't be a leader in the Bronze Age if you don't have access to metal, whether you have it in your empire or it comes to you through trade. And as this cosmopolitan world begins collapsing, the Mediterranean and Middle East entered the Dark Age, which is a period of poverty, isolation, and a loss of knowledge. And the Dark Age that followed the Mycenaean period lasted until about 800 BCE. And this begins the Archaic period, 800 to 480 BCE. Now, one thing I do just want to go over again real quick is the dates of the Persian Empire and their success, 550 to 486 BCE. So they are in the Archaic period. They form after the Dark Age ends. But we're talking about the Dark Age now just because after talking about Minoan Crete, Mycenaean Greece, the fall of that, we dive right into Greece. Particularly everyone's favorite cities, Athens and Sparta. We will save that for our next podcast, though. Email me if you have any questions. And as always, have a great day, everybody. Cheers.